Now, with that said, I kind of wanted to talk about tax policy a little bit further with you, Ryan, because I really love the video that you did regarding Orrin Hatch and how he's constantly talking about how he grew up poor, so he's looking out for...
He grew up in a chicken coop.
Right. So, okay, so he says he grew up in a chicken coop. He also says he worked in a chicken coop. But then you did, through your research and reporting, you found that he also worked as a janitor when he was going to college, graduate school?
Yeah. And he said in a recent hearing, he's like, look, I worked my way through law school. I was a janitor. And he's getting old. I think he got a little confused. He was a janitor, mopped some floors during his time at undergrad, and then he got a scholarship to go to law school in Pittsburgh. And the irony, of course, is that the House Republican bill, and we'll see what comes out of the final Conference Committee, would say that if you got a scholarship in exchange for agreeing to work your way through school, we're going to tax that scholarship as if it was cash money that was delivered to you. And so a lot of these graduate students out there make, let's say, a $12,000 stipend for the year, plus then they get $30,000 or $40,000 of tuition waived. Yep. Now all of a sudden you're paying taxes on $62,000 of income, and every dollar that you made would have to go back to taxes. And it just goes to this whole thing about, I made it, so you should be able to. Except after they made it, a lot of things changed. One, they lifted the ladder up. Two, yes, the cost of law school at the time for him was like $1,300, which translates to about $11,000 in today's money. But today's money wouldn't buy you a year of his law school. His law school, University of Pittsburgh Law School, I think is now almost $40,000 yes, in tuition.
Yeah, so this is something that I talk about so much, and I'm sure it probably like annoys the audience a little bit. I care about making public education, preserving public education, and more importantly, making higher education attainable for everyone, right? But tuition has outpaced inflation so dramatically that, you know, as we've repeated over and over again, student loan debt has outgrown credit card debt in the United States, which is pretty insane. And it's not something that people can get rid of in bankruptcy. So I hate these disingenuous talking points that you see from Republicans, because they pretend as if everything is the same in higher education in regard to the costs and the housing. I mean, when you put all of that together, it's so incredibly expensive to go to college. A lot of people are now forgoing a college education, and it's now turning into a system where enlightenment and opportunities and education is being reserved for the wealthy. They want to further worsen that problem with this tax bill, and I don't think that enough people are talking about it, which is why I loved your report so much.
Yeah, and they want to tax your student loans too.
Yeah.
Because in order to, they could give away $1.5 trillion in free money to the wealthy and to corporations under the budget reconciliation law. But $1.5 trillion is not enough for them. So they need to find ways to raise more money so they can give $2 or $3 trillion and have it only raise the deficit by 1.5. So one of the things they did is they're going after student loan. So right now, you pay a couple $100s a month towards your student loans, or much more for some people. The interest that you pay, you can write off on your taxes at the end of the year. They want to say no, you can't write that off anymore. So they want to they want to get rid of the estate tax on the backs of people paying back their student loans. It's like, you can't make that stuff up.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And I like that, you know, people, reporters like you, are drawing attention to it and doing so in an easily digestible way, because tax policy can get super abstract, super complicated, and people get turned off by the nitty-gritty of policy issues. But it's important that people are empowered with this information so they can fight back. So you can know that when you see a Republican or anyone in Congress arguing that these are tax cuts for the middle class, they are lying to you. They want to get rid of deductions for city and state taxes. And that, of course, disproportionately impacts liberal states. Yeah. And I don't think that that's any type of accident.
And graduate students tend to vote Democratic too, so probably also not a coincidence. But the scale of this stuff is staggering, and this is something that Bernie might talk about today. He yesterday introduced a bill with Elizabeth Warren and some other senators, interestingly, others who want to run for president. Kamala Harris, Gillibrand got behind his bill. That would be a $147 billion Marshall Plan for Puerto Rico. And it's kind of a messaging bill. It's like, this would be nice if this could happen, and this is what progressives should stand for, and then we're going to fight it out later. But that's peanuts.
Yeah.
Like, so on the one hand, that's a pipe dream. Like the idea that you could get this 147 billion to these people who more than 50% of them don't even have power, and they're at risk of a cholera outbreak. And we can't even conceive of the idea that that could actually pass and become law. Meanwhile, CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program, is caught up in this debate over how are you going to pay for it. That's a $5 billion program. $5 billion, $147 billion, yet a $1.5 trillion tax cut is going to go through completely unpaid for. And so you might not care about the tax cut, but it comes at the expense of these other things that we're told, well, we can't do this, can't insure children, can't rebuild Puerto Rico, we're spending all the money.
So I have a question for you, Ryan, because one of the arguments that you hear from Trump's base over and over again is that they were angry at the establishment. They were left behind economically, and they voted for the anti-establishment candidate because they wanted to shake things up. But, you know, even with all of these proposals, even with the unpopular replacement proposals for the Affordable Care Act and, you know, considering the unpopularity of these tax plans, why is it that his base still remains loyal to him? Because it's not like anyone's lying to them. This is the policy. You can read it for yourself, and they still remain loyal. I mean, obviously I'm asking you to speculate, but why do you think that is?
Well, some of them don't, which is an important point. Let's say he won 49% or so of the vote in November. His approval rating is now down to into the 30s. So that's a 20% drop. Like that's 1 out of 5 people that were for him then are no longer for him, and that is without a single. Well, now there've been some hurricanes, but other than that, there weren't any real crises that hit him that weren't inflicted by himself on himself. That's with the stock market adding trillions in kind of paper wealth to the country. So he's got all of these things going well for him, and yet his approval rating does keep coming down. So you're going to have some people who just, like, they wanted him to shake things up. They wanted him to kick the establishment in the teeth. He's doing that. Yeah. He's tweeting up a storm. He's mocking people. He's making fun of Matt Lauer on his way out the door. Like, they're eating that up. And if you believed that the government wasn't really going to do anything for you anyway because it's a corrupt cesspool, then the best you could probably get is a guy who's entertaining and is smacking people around and is like,
that's insane to me.
Of the whole system. But it might be, but it's rational in the sense that if you really don't believe that there's any point to any of this, then if he's out there trashing Muslims, making fun of immigrants and like making fun of Nancy and Chuck and the media, then that's going to be good enough for some percentage. But right. It's not enough. Like, look what happened in the Virginia elections. Look what happened in all the special elections. They're going to get shellacked in the midterms, even though they've gerrymandered the hell out of the map, and that portends him getting shellacked again if he survives. So, a lot of people are sticking with him, but not as many as he would need.
Yeah, that's really interesting. God, I could talk about this stuff forever. I just wanted to ask you one last question that's somewhat related to tax policy. It's more economic policy. But one of the recent stories that I covered on TYT's main show was the fact that 9 Democrats in Congress had joined the GOP to essentially further deregulate some of these banks so they could loosen the restrictions on things like subprime mortgages. I'm sure you're familiar with that. So what is your take on that? Because I think when it comes to certain economic policies, there are certainly Democrats that are willing to sign on, and that was a very specific example for me.
Yeah, it shows that a lot of gains have been made. So on the banking committee itself, you have people like Elizabeth Warren and Sherrod Brown and a couple others who usually vote with them. But then you'd have some other ones. You've got Tim Kaine who signed the bill you're talking about. Yes. Mark Warner was on the bill that you're talking about. I presume that Manchin was. I usually don't even check to see if he was on it. Yeah. That element of the party still exists. They are under a lot more pressure than they used to be. And so people who would get depressed, I'd say, you haven't been here long enough. Like 10 years ago, you would have had almost every Democrat signed on to that bill. Now you only had 9, And the 9 who did took a lot of heat, probably knew they were going to take heat, and said, well, we're going to do this anyway. And so every time they have to think about it, that's a win for the kind of Warren Sanders wing. So it just means that you have to apply more and more pressure. And if Democrats do retake the Senate and the House and the White House in 2020, they'll be in the minority, and there'll be a lot of pressure on them to come along. But you're up against a multi-trillion-dollar industry, so it's not anything you're going to beat quickly or easily.